All right, let's jump right into this because over the last century, humanity's entire understanding of truth, art, and society completely flipped upside down. Today, we're diving deep into the massive paradigm shift between modernism and postmodernism, a heavy hitting philosophical showdown that literally dictates how you view the world around you right now. It's a massive, almost unsettling question, isn't it? What actually happens to our art, our culture, and our society when the foundational stories we've told ourselves for generations suddenly just stop making sense? Well, this deep cultural fracture is exactly what we are about to unpack in this explainer. So, here is our roadmap. We'll start with 1. The promise of modernism, followed by 2. The postmodern fracture. Then we'll check out 3. Clashing styles in art. 4. The sociological shift. And finally ask 5. What comes after postmodernism? To put this into perspective chronologically, this evolution takes us all the way from the smoke-filled skies of the industrial era straight into the hyper-connected glow of the internet age. Modernism really took root in the 1890s and thrived right up until World War II. Then, after a brief transitional period, postmodernism dominated the cultural landscape from the 1960s into the 2000s. And today, we're venturing into totally uncharted territory, postmodernism. Section 1. The Promise of Modernism, the Age of Reason and Progress. Fueled by the Enlightenment and the dizzying pace of the Industrial Revolution, the poet Ezra Pound famously commanded society to make it new. And honestly, that three-word quote brilliantly captures the entire modernist drive. They wanted to violently break away from outdated 19th century traditions and forge entirely new, completely objective truths to fix modern problems. You see, the modernists possessed an almost dogmatic faith in humanity. They firmly believed that through reason, science, and the pursuit of universal truth, human progress was practically guaranteed. For them, art wasn't just light entertainment. It was a deeply serious, critical mission to find meaning. They truly believed a perfect, utopian society was possible, and they were the ones going to build it. Now, to really grasp this era, you have to understand the concept of the meta-narrative, or the grand narrative. Think of this as the intellectual backbone of modernity. Whether it was the promise of endless scientific progress or overarching political frameworks like Marxism, these sweeping, big-picture stories gave society a singular, confident direction. They were incredibly comforting blueprints for how reality worked. And this relentless search for universal answers triggered an absolute Copernican revolution in art. We saw an explosion of rapid, serious experimentation, from the fractured geometric perspectives of Cubism to the mind-bending psychological depths of Surrealism. And the thing to remember is, these weren't just stylistic fads. They were rigorous, objective attempts to strip away the superficial and reveal the absolute core truth of the world. Section 2. The Postmodern Fracture, Disillusionment and Doubt. But then, following the unimaginable horrors of World War II, that optimistic faith in a utopian, perfectly engineered society shattered. The exact same technology meant to save us had brought unprecedented global destruction. Enter French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard, who defined this new era as having an incredulity towards meta-narratives. Put simply, people just stopped believing that science, reason, or any single grand ideology actually had all the answers. And right here is where we hit the core conflict. Modernism sought profound, objective solutions. Postmodernism, on the other hand, looked at a completely fractured world and responded with irony, doubt, and relativism. Modernism believed in truth with a capital T. Postmodernism argued that truth is actually completely subjective. So instead of trying to glue the broken pieces of the world back together into one big picture, postmodernists basically decided to just juggle the fragments and have a bit of fun with them. So instead of one grand blueprint for everyone, postmodernists argued we're actually left with a decentralized web of small narratives, or petits récits. These are local, highly context-specific stories shaped entirely by culture and power dynamics. To a postmodernist, there's absolutely no single correct way to view history, just billions of individual, coexisting experiences bouncing off each other. Section 3. Clashing Styles in Art, the Multidisciplinary Showdown. This massive philosophical pivot didn't just stay in academia, it completely reshaped the physical world around us. In architecture, the super serious, functional modernist glassbox gave way to playful postmodern buildings that would slap on classical columns purely for a laugh. In literature, modernists tried to capture the ultimate truth of human consciousness, while postmodernists started writing metafiction, cynical, self-aware stories that constantly poke you in the ribs to remind you that you're just reading a book. And in art, the sacred traditional canvas was swapped out for chaotic, mixed-media video installations, totally blurring the line between high art and cheap pop culture.
Section 4. The sociological shift. Plurality over purity. Moving beyond just aesthetics, this ideological fracture completely transformed how we organize society itself. Postmodern sociology treats those grand, overarching systems not as tools of liberation, but actually as instruments of control. They argue knowledge is never completely neutral. It's always tied up with power. By tearing down those grand narratives, room was finally made for marginalized voices to actually challenge centralized institutions. We started seeing identity not as a fixed objective trait, but as something fluid, culturally constructed, and constantly being renegotiated.
Section 5. What comes after postmodernism? As we cross the millennium and fully plunge into the internet age, a lot of scholars argue that the endless irony and detachment of postmodernism has finally run its course. I mean, we've deconstructed everything, so now what do? Well, we're actually seeing a massive return to sincerity and trust, a cultural mood often called new sincerity. People are just exhausted by cynical detachment. We want to believe in things again, and we want to be genuinely immersed in our experiences, rather than standing safely on the sidelines making clever, ironic jokes.
However, not everyone is so optimistic. Theorists like Alan Kirby argue we've actually entered something called pseudo-modernism. Here, the internet doesn't necessarily create genuine connection, it just makes us hyper-consumers of a very shallow culture. We click, we scroll, we swipe, we download. We are participating constantly, sure, but in a way that is incredibly fleeting and superficial. It's a really fascinating, if slightly terrifying, take on our modern digital lives.
So, looking back at this entire evolution, from those confident grand narratives to fractured, skeptical irony, all the way to the intense digital immersion of today, we see a really clear pattern. Our philosophical frameworks continuously adapt to the profound technological and social traumas of their eras. Ideas don't just exist in a vacuum. They are our collective, desperate attempts to make sense of a world that is constantly shifting right beneath our feet. As you navigate today's hyper-connected, incredibly loud, multi-narrative world, I want to leave you with this final, provocative question about our current cultural reality. Are we still just playing around with the broken, cynical fragments of postmodernism, or are we finally rolling up our sleeves and building a new, sincere foundation for the future? Thank you for exploring this explainer with me, and whatever you do, keep questioning the narratives around you.